Experts by experience. Real conversations, real people, real stories. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Catch 22's Experts by Experience podcast. So in today's conversation, we're going to be diving deep into the experiences of actually women in the criminal justice system, the challenges they face, and what work is out there that can support their rehabilitation and empowerment. So today we are joined by the lovely, wonderful Lizzy Jewell, who is involved with Working Chance, an organization dedicated to helping women. So Lizzy, can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you became involved with Working Chance?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Lizzy. I'm head of communications and engagement at Working Chance, which is the UK's only employment charity solely focused on helping women with convictions to find work, education, or training. I've been here about 4 years. Before that, I led communications work for lots of different charities. So an anti-human trafficking organisation, a sexual health service, and a couple of organisations that work around different themes around kind of violence and exploitation.
Thank you so much for that.
Amazing. Thank you, Lizzy. So we're going to kind of have a back and forth situation today. We're going to trial it. We're going to see how it goes. But my question for you is about your experience. So in your experience those last 4 years and then your wider experience past your time at Working Chance, can you tell us about some of the common factors that lead women into the criminal justice system?
Yeah, of course. The first thing to say is that obviously no two women has exactly the same experience or exactly the same journey. So I'm painting with quite broad brushstrokes here. But what we see at Working Chance is that really the majority of women who end up in the criminal justice system, they've experienced some kind of trauma or poverty or abuse in their lifetime before they end up in the justice system. The majority, so way more than half, experience domestic violence at some point. And then their experiences in terms of getting involved with the justice system, women predominantly commit non-violent offences, commonly things like shoplifting or theft. Often these offences are linked directly to poverty. So they're women just trying to get by. And I think that combination of experiences is why women's offending is really, really different to men's, which is why we as an organisation have this kind of really specialist lens on what we do and who we work with.
Yeah, I hear that. Thanks for that, Lizzy. And I'm guessing it's kind of a discussion where it's more of a gendered situation. So can you tell us kind of like what stereotypes kind of come into play when women are criminalized or when they do come into contact with the criminal justice system?
Yeah, so as I've said, women tend to be victims of crimes that are worse than the ones that they've perpetrated often. So it's quite messy sometimes. Like, it's very tempting to want to sort people into victims of crime and perpetrators of crime. And really, that isn't the reality, particularly for women, but for lots and lots of people who come through the justice system too. And I also think afterwards, like after they've left the justice system, after they've left prison, women feel that they are judged more harshly as an offender. And I say that with big quote marks around it. It's not the word that we choose to use, but women feel like they are judged more harshly than their male counterparts would have been. And I think a lot of that is this, women have this expectation put on them by society that women are supposed to behave perfectly. They're supposed to be the ideal wife, the ideal mother. And for someone who has then transgressed that, has, committed an offense, whatever that is, that kind of, that stigma can feel a little bit heavier, and that shame that someone carries around with them can be a bit heavier for them. And that can really impact their confidence, and their ability to kind of put herself out there, go out and look for work and present in a really confident way to an employer as well.
For sure. I definitely agree with that. And I think in our earlier conversations, we did mention that idea of women being, doubly deviant, like you mentioned. So I guess that's what the nuance is, where we're expected to be a certain type of way. And once we go against that grain, then we're treated 10 times as harshly. And I think especially for many of the listeners that we work with, or the services that we work with, where we do work with a lot of men, they don't probably see those nuances of, okay, how is it through the female perspective or the female lens? Both of the expectations are there, but the outcome is very different, isn't it? But yeah.
Yeah, and women without convictions experience a lot of that as well. Like that weight that society puts on women is there for lots of women. And then if you slap on a prison sentence or a conviction that you then have to disclose to an employer, or like that your family and your friends and people in your community know about, like all of these things can really compound and add up and combine together.
Of course, of course.
Yeah, it's so heavy, isn't it? Like there's so many things, like we're talking about the nuance, but like the larger systemic things that women encounter in the world are also like, you know, it's all entrapped in that as well. So I guess off of that conversation, off of like as a little tangent, women's experience in the justice system, but how does the justice system respond to women? So what does that look like? How do they treat women?
I think women often tell us that it feels as though they are moving through a system that is very much designed with men as the default. And partly that's a numbers game. So women make up quite a small proportion, about 4% of the prison population. But the impact on those women is that often they report moving through systems that don't understand them, working with professionals that maybe aren't trained to understand them. They don't know that background and that context. And there are some great examples of some pockets of good practice. And we often hear from women that actually prison staff, some of them can be really supportive, but it's not the case for everybody. And, you know, if you're out of prison and on probation and you're the only woman on your probation officer's caseload, it's quite likely that, you know, this professional is very busy, very overstretched. It's likely that they don't have the knowledge or the training to give you that really specific, insightful support to kind of set you up to succeed, which is kind of where we come in and other women's organizations come in as part of this patchwork of support.
Yeah. Yeah, because my next question was, does it feel like to you, working for Working Chance, like women's context is understood and acknowledged?
For the vast majority of women in prison, it's the wrong place for them. And, you know, they're imprisoned often, as I said, for nonviolent offences on the whole. And often if other needs had been met sooner, if other support had been in place before that time, then prison could be avoided. So it does seem to be a sort of a last resort where other parts of that systemic, other parts of the system have failed.
Yeah, for sure. And I think actually that's what I was going to move on to next. Kind of what role does, you know, having access to mental health services, social care, kind of that multidisciplinary team, what support or having that access, what role does that play in their journey into the criminal justice system or prior to that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think it's by the time that someone is in prison, all of these other elements that could have come into place sooner maybe haven't. And access to mental health support in prison is really, really patchy. And so we do hear that some women do get the support that they needed. And, you know, sometimes people talk about prison in such a way as like they didn't get support elsewhere, and it was prison that finally got them on the radar of support services that can help them. That's I think probably quite a small number of people. And then there are other people in prison, other women in prison, who then don't get the support that they really need around their mental health. And it means that we hear a lot around women feeling like they need to take really drastic action to be able to be seen by somebody or get something triggered so that there is a support service in place for them. And self-harm in women's prison is currently the highest it's ever been. For context, self-harm in women's prisons is at the rate of about 8 times the rate of self-harm in men's prison. So it's a huge. I think women kind of process mental health issues differently to men, and so the state of women inside women's prisons is that there is a kind of a sense of desperation, and it's really all they've got to cope. But it, what that indicates, the rates of self-harm in women's prisons being so high, is that really, as they are, prison isn't safe for women. If there is that level of people turning to such drastic measures in order to either get mental health support, or that's just what they're doing to kind of process what's going on, then it is not a safe environment for those women. So about 1 in 3 women in prison will self-harm at some point, and it just means that the provision, the mental health services to keep those women safe isn't good enough.
On that, do you see, like, is the world and the systems responding to that? You said you're kind of working chance of shouting about it. Is anyone doing any work around that other than you guys?
Yeah, so actually all of the women's organizations who work in the criminal justice space, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. We're saying the same thing. So we're part of the National Women's Justice Coalition, which is a group of 26 women's organizations. We're all saying the same thing. And then sort of from the policy perspective, it is promising that the creation of the Women's Justice Board under Prisons Minister James Simpson, the messaging coming from them is also saying that actually prison is the wrong place for the majority of women. We obviously want to see change quicker than this. We want more of a momentum. We want to, see changes in sentencing, more of a reliance on community sentences rather than custodial sentences. Like, we want to really see that change, but it does feel like the message is starting to get through there.
I hear that. You know what I was going to even ask? Sorry, Nick, but in all of this, I'm wondering, like, idealistically speaking, you mentioned community sentences, but what would be the alternative, say, in an idealistic world where the women's conferences had their say and those policies were put forward? What would that look like?
I think it's several things. I think it's more early intervention so that the focus can be shifted onto prevention rather than punishment. So if women have what they need in terms of support around domestic abuse, mental health, substance misuse, all of that stuff, then really their interactions with the justice system will be much, much fewer. And then, so that's intervention. That's the kind of first bit. But then for women who then do go on to be involved with the criminal justice system, all of the evidence shows that community sentencing is more effective than a custodial sentence in terms of preventing reoffending. And it also means that women can keep hold of custody of their children. It means they don't have to move house. They can keep hold of their tenancy for their housing if they're renting. It means they can continue in their job if they're working. Like, the effectiveness of community sentencing over particularly short prison sentences is, all of the evidence points to the fact that it's the right thing to do in order to prevent reoffending. So that is absolutely what we would say, that it is cheaper, it's more effective, and it keeps all of the kind of family and community systems in place, which is just beneficial to everybody, really.
Yeah. And is that unique to women, or is that in general across the board? Would you find that community sentencing is more effective?
I think it is across the board that a greater use of community sentencing would be helpful, but it is particularly true for women.
Yeah.
Okay, Lizzy. So that's kind of when they're in prison, we're talking about women's justice, the state of the system. What do you think are the biggest barriers that women face when they leave prison? So rebuilding their lives.
I think the biggest thing is that there is a huge number of priorities that all get dumped in your lap as soon as you leave prison, and you've got to try and navigate them all at once. So it is quite difficult to just get out of prison, get a job, go back to normal, because lots of women need to find somewhere to live. They need to get, access to a GP or any medication. They need to sign up for benefits, such as universal credit, and they want to maybe get custody of their children back. And then there's all the stuff that they've been dealing with, such as their mental health, substance misuse. All of this stuff overlaps and interlocks, and you've got to kind of untangle this and deal with all of these things at once. And so there is a huge pressure when it comes to getting back to normal after prison for women to kind of approach all of these really, really chunky issues all at once. And so actually for women, employment isn't necessarily the top thing in their list. And it might come later. So we at Working Chance don't have a time limit after your conviction or after prison. It's not like you have to have left prison in the last 2 years in order to get support from us. We don't have anything like that, because different people will kind of make their way through this journey at different rates. And, if we accept that most women in the justice system have experienced some kind of trauma, poverty, abuse before they were arrested, it's likely that some of those elements will still be an issue after the justice system as well. So what we see is that on the whole, men tend to find it a little bit easier to get employment sooner after prison, which I think when I joined Working Chance, I assumed that the reason men found it easier to find work was to do with kind of prejudice in the workplace, or something coming from employers. But actually, I think it's much more to do with women having this, these other barriers and this really complicated set of circumstances to kind of navigate before employment becomes an option. But then once a woman is in employment, and actually this isn't just women, this is everybody, once you're in employment, you then have this incredible, it offers so much. And so we talk about it in terms of preventing reoffending, but it's so much more than that. And it's so much more than an income as well. Like, really meaningful employment that gives you a reason to get out of bed in the morning, that it gives you that structure, it gives you colleagues and purpose, and all of this stuff. So once employment is part of, it's one of the pieces in the puzzle, but once it's in there, the effects of that is really life-changing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's what's so powerful about what Working Chance is doing, providing that, and especially because there's no timeline, but providing those tools to meet those needs, especially when coming out of such a tough situation, is so imperative. But I do want to ask, as one of our final questions, what kind of gives you hope in the work that you're doing Working Chance at the moment?
I think that every time I meet a woman who's been through our service, I end up feeling really, really hopeful. Or we read the feedback that our frontline teams get. And it shines a light on the fact that life after the justice system isn't easy. But our clients go on to do really amazing things. And I think one of the things that I really love about Working Chance, and what makes me feel really hopeful, is we're not the job center. So we're not interested in pushing women into whatever the first job that will take her is. And we really encourage women to raise their standards and, think about what their goals are and what they want to achieve, rather than just who will take me kind of thing. So, we've got women going on to do really, really incredible things, really interesting work in all kinds of different sectors and industries, which is really exciting. And I also, along with some colleagues, I chair our lived experience advisory panel, which is women with lived experience who do all sorts of cool stuff. So they scrutinize our organization and our service to make sure that it's the best that it can be. But then we also have supported them to do media opportunities and a creative writing course and all of these really fantastic things. And just every time I leave a meeting with our advisory panel, I'm so warm and fuzzy, because they are just so forward looking. They use their lived experience to try and make things better, but then they also are just going on to do incredible things. So yeah, there is a lot of hope, as much as what I've said so far is a bit doom and gloom.
Yeah, I think it's the reality. Yeah, It's the reality, but I think it's definitely wonderful how it seems like such a group effort, and there are so many people dedicated to the cause. Um, we do have to wrap up now, but sorry, shameless plug. If you do want to shout out any services that are working within the same realm of working chance, that provide, those tools and that safe space for women who have left the criminal justice system, feel free to take the stage. Let us know of any other services.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would advise that women get in touch with a women's centre locally. If you've got one, they do unbelievable work, and it's really holistic as well. So there might be like debt advice or domestic abuse services or mental health services, but specifically around what women need. So absolutely go and look up your local women's centre. And then there's some amazing specialist organisations as well for women with convictions. So Clean Break do theatre and creative workshops, birth companions support pregnant women and new mums. And for employment support for men, also Switchback and Bounce Back do amazing work specifically for men as well.
Really appreciate you sharing your expertise, and yes, to everybody listening, I'm sure that's made me feel a little bit more hopeful, so I'm sure that will have imparted on some of our listeners. Thank you so much, Lizzy. Really appreciate your time.
Great, thank you so much.
Experts by Experience is brought to you by Catch-22. For more episodes, visit www.catch-22.org.uk. Now playing on National Prison Radio.